what can we expect from you out there on the track tonight?
Listen, I have a wife, 2 kids. I have, full-time jobs. I'm never nervous. I don't even know what that word means. Can you explain what nervous means? No. I'm ready to have fun. I've never done anything like this before. I got asked to be a part of this. This is fascinating. Like, it's so cool to just look around and see what goes on here. So I'm just excited to get out on the horse. And you want trash talk? Is that what you're asking me for? No trash talk. I hope everyone does well.
All right. Everyone's going to do well, but it has to be a winner. So give me your trifecta. Who's going to come in first, second, and third? Your heat.
I will go Maria 1, me 2, Willie 3, Moose goes 4th.
Well, it's very simple. I won this event last year. I won my heat, and so the defending champ has to be the favorite. Now, that makes me a little nervous just because I feel like it's hard to repeat. There's a little pressure when you're the favorite, but that being said, I'm still optimistic.
So your heat, it's you,
yes.
Moose and Keith from Better Sports Network, and Willie Colon.
I think Keith might be my stiffest competition, and I asked for this because I actually recruited Keith, if you didn't know. So Keith, if you win, you're welcome.
Malusis is very good. I mean, he knows what he's doing, but I'm going to go with Maria.
Keith is waving to the crowd. He must pay attention because they're off. It's Mark Malusis going for the lead. Maria Marino on the outside, and now Keith Irizarry on the outside with speed, and they're 3 wide into the first turn. Woo! Mark Malusis is locked in for his life. 138 and 2. They're into the stretch. Sportscasters Derby 2. And still in front, Keith Irizarry. And now Mark Malusis is trying to squeeze on through.
Come on! Yeah! Come on! Let's go! Come on, kick it! Dig it! Yeah!
Keith Irizarry. Keith, you did it all the way, wire to wire. Over Mark Malusis.
Awesome! That was so cool!
The champ is here! Keith, what was it like being out there? Adrenaline rush, you were doing the Instagram Live, so there was no panic. You looked cool, calm, collected the whole time, and you won it.
I felt really comfortable. I did. Like, I know you were joking with me before. Are you nervous? Are you whatever? What are you? David, the driver, was awesome. He's like, we're going to win this. I said, all right, let's win this. And he said, let's go. Yeah, I just felt really comfortable. I did. It was fun. We're in the lead. I got Maria Marino on the right side of me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she's going to beat us, right? And then out of nowhere, you see Moose coming up this way, and we feel him breathing down our neck. And I'm like,
Moose
no!
on the loose. Watch out.
Moose was definitely on the loose, and we just got Moose by a neck, a nose, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, but again, all of this for a great cause, and it was absolutely awesome to do this. It was cool.
All right, Keith, congratulations, and no matter what, you could always hold this over Moose's head.
Yeah!
It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Greetings and salutations to everybody tuning in. 7:03 in the PM on a Thursday means it's time for the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show right here on the Better Sports Network. Follow us on Twitter at Better Network. I am Eric Balkman, your slightly above average host. At Eric Balkman on Twitter. You know me from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, at HSFF Hour on Twitter, the FFPC, at FFPC, and of course the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown as well. Got a jam-packed show tonight. As a reminder, sign up for the FFPC main event right now. Take your shot at a $1 million grand prize. You can also sign up for the Fantasy Pros Championship. Also a $1 million grand prize at just a $350 entry fee. You can play Dynasty Fantasy Football year-round with the FFPC at myffpc.com. More than a decade of Dynasty leagues that we've been doing there. 1,400 plus leagues, not a single one has ever folded. Plenty of other best ball action. We're getting into a lot of best ball stuff tonight. I promise you that. Starting at $5. You get $5. The FFPC has a league for you. myffpc.com. Shout out to our producer, Anthony Rivera, the man behind the glass tonight. I want to welcome in tonight's guest co-host. You know him from the 33rd team, player profiler, and of course, 1 week season. You already follow him on Twitter, and if you're not, you're doing it wrong. At HighLowFF. Please welcome in Mark Garcia. Mark, welcome in, man.
Thanks, dude. I'm stoked to be here. Jam it up. You may not remember this, I've actually been on the High Stakes Fantasy
Yes, you
Football
have.
Show. This was before I was anything in the industry. This was before. I mean, I'm still a nobody in the industry. Let's get it right. But
No, you're not. That's not true at all. That's not true at all.
Yeah, this was before, dude. I was a young buck, just running FFPC leagues with my good friend from high school, and we were like in the top 10 early in the season. And you had us both on. Oh God, this was probably 8, 9, 10 years ago, maybe something like that.
You were, I want to say, and I went back and looked, and I forgot what it was, but I think it was like season 2 or season 3. No, it was season 3 or season 4 of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. So I was going to lead off the broadcast tonight saying, like, the last time we spoke on the airwaves, you were just crushing these high stakes leagues in the FFPC. Now I have you back on. High-Low FF is a must-follow on Twitter. You were crushing it for 1 week season, which is your baby, right? That's your baby, 1 week season?
Yeah. I would say I identify with 1 week season the most. It's kind of I was kind of lucky enough to get in on the ground floor, pretty much work my way up, and now kind of head of a lot of departments, and kind of, yeah, it is my baby, nurturing it and seeing it grow. It's a cool thing.
So tell us about 1 week season, like at 1 week season on Twitter, by the way, oneweekseason.com. Can you tell us a little bit about like the viewers, what they can get? Why should they be checking out your website? Because I think you guys offer a lot of great content there.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like how it sounds with the name 1 week season. We are very, we're different from most of other sites that provide content in the sense that we are attacking DFS, best ball, and wagering now from this lens of primarily theoretics, analytics, and conceptual knowledge of the game. So we're trying to merge kind of where you see a lot of analytics focus around the industry. We're trying to merge the analytics with theoretics and conceptual knowledge. And we try and do that through primarily DFS, but we have added best ball and wagering now as well. So if that piques your interest, yeah, please head over to oneweekseason.com. Get signed up. You can throw down promo code HILO for 20% off.
I think that this is appropriate to have you on this week, which is basically the first show we've done. No, take that back. Second show we've done after the release of the Oppenheimer movie, where, you know, Oppenheimer, a legend, J. Robert Oppenheimer in theoretical physics. Now we're getting theoretical fantasy here on the show tonight. This is pretty appropriate. You also do some stuff for Player Profiler and 33rd Team as well.
Yeah, so I just joined both of those entities this off season. 33rd lead fantasy analyst over there, so primarily doing DFS and best ball work over there. And then with Player Profiler, I'm only 2 episodes into the First Mover podcast series over there. So looking forward to some cool things that are going to be going on at both those places as well.
We're going to get into a lot of stuff that Mark specializes in tonight. We're going to get into some training camp news, some breaking training camp news as well at the top of the show. And that's basically going to be the first hour. The second hour, I want to play a Where Do You Stand with Mark tonight. It'll be a wide receiver edition, all wide receivers. I got 6 or 7 wide receivers lined up to let us know where he stands on FFPC best ball teams as far as those players go. And then we'll also get into some targets and fades in the FFPC best ball tournament. Remember, you can sign up for that at myffpc.com, just $125 entry, and you can win $200,000. Okay, I just got this on my phone as you were talking here. So we're a little off the cuff here. Ian Rappaport tweeted out that Jalen Ramsey, there has been no firm determination on his knee injury, but we do know he's having surgery. But Rappaport said the likeliest outcome is a full meniscus repair. If all goes well, the best and healthiest option is Jalen Ramsey coming back to the Fins in December, Mark, which is, I mean, it's a huge hit. Now, as far as fantasy goes, I don't know if there's a ton to glean from this, but given how Waddle and Tyreek Hill are bunched up in the first couple rounds of the FFPC best ball tournament, are you actually breaking ties in favor of those guys, knowing that, hey, maybe the Dolphins are going to be in more shootouts than we think, especially when you consider the elite offenses they're going against in the AFC East, including Buffalo and the New York Jets?
Yeah, that's an interesting from a theoretical perspective as well, because I was somewhat, and I say very, very somewhat, kind of not hedging the field's stance on Miami, but taking a relative, I think, to the hype that Miami has been getting, relatively underweight approach. I still, it's impossible not to like the top 3 But there's significant ambiguities in the backfield. And that's kind of the stance that I have been attacking this full off season, is playing the what if Dalvin doesn't go to Miami card. And I think there's a lot of value currently still available in that backfield. So, but the fact that, what the Dolphins have focused on heavily this offseason is shoring up that secondary, that pass rush, and they bring in Vic Fangio at defensive coordinator. That team was going to look far different on the defensive side of the ball coming into 2023 than they did last season. So, yes, Jalen Ramsey still, regardless of kind of his underlying metrics last season from a shutdown perspective, still one of the top 5 or 6 pure island type corners in the league. And bringing him into that defense where they already had some pieces, but they clearly had significant holes in the secondary last year, was going to make a big difference, primarily playing under Vic Fangio. So yeah, the loss of Ramsey, that was more shocking and startling to me from a how do we handle this news, like on the spot type thing, than somebody like Kadarius Toney or somebody like even Joe Burrow today, who, pulled up and got carted off, but looking like he'll be okay, just a calf strain. But yeah, that was one of the bigger moves, I think, from a what can we expect from Miami, particularly on their defensive side of the ball.
You mentioned Joe Burrow, Mark, and it sounds like it's going to be a not a strange calf. Well, maybe it'll be a strange calf for a little bit while he heals, but it's a strained calf for Joe Burrow right now. Jamar Chase already said that Joe Burrow gave him a head nod as he was exiting the field. Chase said he's okay. According to Zach Taylor, it's a strained calf. The team does not believe that there's any kind of Achilles issue with Joe Burrow at all. It looks like he avoided something major today. And, anytime it's an injury where you're carted off, we're always like, oh, what do we do? I have not looked at any of the FFPC drafts that have gone off this afternoon since this news hit. But I'm just kind of curious, is there anything for you right now because we'll probably know more at this time tomorrow about Burrow's cap. Is there any value to be gotten with the Bengals? Like, I feel like I'm not moving down Higgins or Chase or even Burrow for that matter based on this news. Do you think he's going to fall? Is there a slight dip where maybe you target Burrow and the Bengals a little bit more than you normally would have without this injury over the next 24 hours?
I don't think that we're going to see any significant dip with that. All the reports have been relatively positive after that first initial shock that he was being carted off. It is an interesting. We'll preface this with I am no physical therapist. I am no doctor, but it is interesting that all the soft tissue stuff, that's connected to other soft tissue stuff and other tendons and joints and ligaments and all that stuff. So while it's a relatively minor injury, a calf strain, there is the potential for this to be nagging throughout the season. If it's associated with some ligaments in the knee or his Achilles, his ankle, those type things. Whether or not that materializes in anything, I don't think it's anything worth being overly concerned with now. But if it is something that is lingering, where I see that it could be the biggest issue for the Bengals themselves is with his pocket mobility. So I don't know if it's going to materialize that way, but we could see Burrow taking some additional sacks, which from a pass volume perspective isn't necessarily a bad thing. So I don't think there's any reason really to be overly concerned with that situation.
I want to get into so it looks like everything's okay in Cincinnati, but there's been some stuff bubbling up in Kansas City, not necessarily from an injury standpoint, Mark, but from the standpoint of, hey, this guy is turning some heads, and that guy is Rashee Rice, a guy who is apparently leading all receivers in first-team reps at training camp right now, according to Nate Taylor, who covers the Kansas City Chiefs for The Athletic. As a reminder, Rashee Rice has some draft capital behind him. He was the number 55 overall pick in the draft this year. This after the Chiefs used high draft capital on getting Sky Moore on the team last year and signed Marquez Valdes-Scantling to a big contract. Don't forget about trading for Kadarius Toney as well. Rashee Rice right now, wide receiver 65 at the end of the 14th round in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament ADP. So, Mark, let me ask you, what's your portfolio look like on Rashee Rice? And is this a guy we need to be gobbling up right now because his $14.09 price is simply too low?
I'll start with the theoretics of that situation because there's ambiguity off the charts kind of with everybody except 2 really players. And those players are Travis Kelce, who is obviously Travis Kelce, and then Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who we know is probably going to take on that Demi X/Z type wide receiver role. So he is the guy that they utilize on pretty much the 5 through the 9 routes. So he's running more X type 4s, 5s, and 6s, and he's also working downfield in the 7, 8s, and 9 type routes, which is kind of, you think about it as like your safety manipulator type routes.
Mm-hmm.
He's that guy, and that is unlikely to change. The other 2 primary wide receiver spots is where all the ambiguity has been in the Chiefs this offseason. My stance has been, I'm probably going to catch all kinds of ridicule for this, but my stance has been with Kadarius Toney, and the fact that they went out and got him last season, the fact that he has been a top 10 in most efficiency metrics from a analytics perspective. And that has led to lower than I probably want to be at this point on Rashee Rice. So I got some catch up to do. My best ball portfolio is about 750 drafts right now, and I think I'm at like 6 or 7% Rashee Rice, whereas I'm at like 14%, I think, on Kadarius Toney. But so the reason that, or part of portfolio management and drafting the way that I do in a very exploitative fashion allows me to play catch up, because I know that I still have a ton of FFPC best ball drafts to do. I know I still have a ton of BBMs over an underdog to do. And it's just from a like overall portfolio management theoretical perspective, I've allowed myself the out to kind of still play catch up in that situation.
I think, and obviously there's a path to getting Rashee Rice shares here. And the fact that he is going so low does still make him very palatable.
Yeah.
People like you and me, to the viewers that are watching this right now. A guy that I'm not sure what to make of right now, and he's affecting another guy that's going really high in drafts right now, is Dalvin Cook. Fox Sports' Craig Carton reported that Dalvin Cook is scheduled to meet with the Jets. According to this report, they're only about $1 million off in the contract, which for a guy who wanted as much money as Cook did, I can't imagine that $1 million is going to be holding up this deal very long.
Yeah.
Now, last year, 1,100 plus yards, almost 1,200 yards on the ground, 8 touchdowns, played all 17 games. He still could be facing a suspension. We don't know about that. But I guess the question here is, and this is a twofold question for you here, Mark. Dalvin Cook is being drafted in the FFPC best ball tournament as running back 31. He's going smack dab in the 8th round, right behind guys like his brother, James Cook, and Alvin Kamara. He's going right ahead of Samaje Perine, Zach Charbonnet, Antonio Gibson in that area. So number one, how do you handle Dalvin Cook with this news right now, where it seems like there's not much more that needs to be figured out for him to become a Jet? And then number two, Breece Hall, a guy who, if he wouldn't have torn his ACL last year, the Jets probably aren't even looking at Dalvin Cook. And this dude might be the 101 in drafts this year based on how he was crushing it last year before the injury. This is a guy that's still going significantly high at the 307. He's basically right ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs and Najee Harris, right behind Ramondre Stevenson and Josh Jacobs. How do you now handle, knowing this, what we just heard from Craig Carton, how do you handle Dalvin Cook in the middle of the 8th? How do you handle Breece Hall in the middle of the 3rd?
Yeah, so I utilize a very exploitative draft strategy, and I do so by varied exposures within tiers. And Dalvin Cook is currently like smack dab in the middle of a running back tier in an area of the draft where wide receiver sees a massive fall off. So think about and this again is from an upside perspective, but your Kadarius Tonys, your Rashad Batemans, your Jameson Williams, kind of after that, you're into very, very strange range in wide receiver upside. So you're talking about Michael Thomas's, you're talking about guys that are a significant fall off from a weekly upside perspective compared to those previous couple names. So the fact that Dalvin has been in this like middle of the tier range in that area of the draft where wide receivers fall off a cliff has led to a lower ownership on his profile overall for me personally. And again, that's just from an exploitative mindset of, I know that there's a lot of ambiguity associated with that, and the fact that I can still just continue because the previous like 6 weeks have been Dalvin is going to Miami. So my leverage on that was I was attacking Miami's backfield rather heavily and attacking wide receivers, double dipping on that leverage around where Dalvin is going. When you look at the second part of that question, as far as Breece Hall goes, Breece Hall is one of the more fascinating cases as far as like pure analytics go, because on one hand, like his efficiency metrics were easily across the board top 3 to 5 in the NFL last season at the running back position once he started seeing starter snaps. On the other hand, you have the empirical data that we have that shows a significant 20 to 25% drop off in running back efficiency metrics in the first season back from a torn ACL. The general consensus around the industry is the rebuttal of Adrian Peterson. It's like, well, yeah, this guy did it, and he went off to a borderline MVP season. He was the number 1 RB that year. It's like, yeah, like unicorns exist every now and then. Like it's gonna, statistically speaking, the number of ACL injuries, it's bound to happen at some point. But the fact that those two, it's like the catch-22, like those two empirical and analytical heads are butting. So to me, the initial gut reaction from drafters is that, through my observations, is that we have to pick a side. It's like, I need to be in or I need to be out Breece Hall. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think in best ball cumulative drafts, Breece Hall is probably a horrible pick at ADP. I think in contests like the FFPC or BBM or DraftKings, wherever you're getting your kind of playoff style contests, he's probably overdrafted per median range outcome, but with the caveat, the asterisk that these are playoff contests where his late season production could be extremely valuable. So who's to say whether he's a terrible pick or a good pick in those type of contests in the third round? Where I'm choosing to get my exposure to Breece Hall is in weekly contests. And really the only one we have now is over at Underdog, where they just released the weekly winner. So I'm choosing to get my Breece Hall exposure there, where I can basically say, hey, I have this elite range of outcomes for maybe 7 to 8 weeks out of the season. And I can accept the fact that over the first half of the season, he might not be kind of who he's being drafted as.
You know, and I think that's the way that we have to look at this, right? Especially when you're talking about, you know, whatever format you're playing. And I think this is true. We've been centering on the FFPC best ball tournament tonight, but I think you can make the case for that in the Fantasy Pro Championship, the FFPC main event. You know, when you're trying to beat out thousands of other teams, especially when you're drafting more than one team, I think that's a good key to keep in mind as far as Breece Hall goes, and Dalvin Cook, quite frankly, as well. Mm-hmm. Speaking of AFC running backs here, J.K. Dobbins, boy, this just every single year with this guy, right?
Yeah.
John
it's
Harbaugh.
Unfortunate.
It is unfortunate. Yeah. John Harbaugh said today that J.K. Dobbins, the situation with him is, quote, complicated, end quote, but the team is working through it. Now, he was placed on the PUP list at the start of training camp. And I thought this would be like the first year in his career in the NFL where he wouldn't be placed on the PUP list, and yet it happened anyway. He's entering the 4th season of his career. He wants a new deal. Obviously, we know the situation with running backs and wanting to get paid around the NFL. I don't really know if Dobbins has as strong a leg to stand on as some of these other guys like Ezekiel Elliott, Kareem Hunt, Dalvin Cook even. You know, these are all players, Saquon Barkley, Tony Pollard, the list goes on. You know, Dobbins has been all right, but I don't think he's ever put it together for a full season before, and I think that hampers him a little bit. Now, we talk about the leverage that Dobbins has, and it's not great, but that's us on the outside. Like, it shouldn't matter what we think. It should be mattering what Dobbins and the Ravens think, because that's the reality of the situation. So, and I think you might answer this question a little bit similarly to what you just did about Breece Hall and Dalvin Cook, but I'm going to ask you anyway. J.K. Dobbins right now has actually fallen. We've seen him in the pros versus Joes drafts that have been going on this week, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. We're going to have more Sunday, Monday, Tuesday with, you know, 6 FFPC Joes, 6 fantasy industry guys in each draft. And we've seen some of these guys start off with a bunch of receivers and tight ends, sometimes the occasional quarterback, and then they'll draft J.K. Dobbins as their first running back. Now, in the FFPC best ball tournament, he's slipping into the 6th round. You can get him in the early 6th round as the 18th running back off the board. Should this news, not only about Dobbins being placed on the PUP, Harbaugh saying that it's a complicated situation, and then in the same breath talking about how thrilled he is that Melvin Gordon is in Baltimore, is this a buying opportunity or a fading opportunity, in your opinion, for J.K. Dobbins here, Mark?
Yeah, I like to think of these situations through a different lens than I think the majority of fantasy, both analysts and players do. The majority of the field is thinking about these situations from an opportunity cost perspective if they play, basically, or when they play, or
Mm-hmm.
the opportunity cost of drafting them. So in a best ball contest or in a redraft contest, that's per ADP. And now we're comparing that ADP to a range of outcomes, right? Which the median projection, which is how rankings are developed, is right smack dab in the middle of those. I like to also think about these situations from the sense of opportunity cost of not having them on your team. So the opportunity cost of not having Brees Hall is that he is that unicorn, and we know that he kind of has that in him. When you compare that to a guy like J.K. Dobbins, a little bit along the same lines, somebody like Javonte Williams, what is the opportunity cost of not having them is much lower than compared to a guy like Brees Hall. So I think any dip in ADP is something that I would be looking to take advantage of on a guy like J.K. Dobbins, who I think the opportunity cost of not drafting him is probably more skewed to upside than compared to a guy like Javonte Williams, because I am less concerned about the overall competition that is in Baltimore than I am with Javonte Williams and Samaje Perine, because they obviously in Denver identified Samaje Perine early. They went out and got him early, whereas the kind of running back fallout in Baltimore is like, we have these guys. We got Gus Edwards. We've got a couple of guys, and we're okay. Okay, well, there's this opportunity to bring in another body. We'll accept that right before camp. So to me, that's telling from the sense of like the opportunity cost of not drafting J.K. Dobbins is probably more weighted to the upside when compared to some of these other guys, not as much as a guy like Brees Hall.
I think that we should. Okay, so you and I both know that we should not overrate what we see, especially early in training camp, right?
Yeah.
It's worth talking about, but we also got to be careful not to overrate it. Well, after one day, Mark Garcia, Rashad Penny was running with the first team offense in Philadelphia. The defending NFC champs, a notorious run-heavy team, has had Rashad Penny over Kenneth Gainwell and DeAndre Swift on the first team. After the first day, now, Rashad Penny has a crazy good 5.8 career yards per carry average. He also does not have the greatest track record with catching the ball. And it sounds like this is going to be an offense that is going to be a three-headed monster at running back, maybe even four when you throw in Boston Scott there too. Rashad Penny, running back 37 at the 10:05. Now he's going in this glut here with Brian Robinson, Devon Achane, Jerick McKinnon in that area. He's being drafted as a fringe top top 36 running back. So like a running back 3, running back 4. And I'm kind of curious, is there a buying opportunity on Penny here, or should we be ignoring this and understanding that, look, it's still the FFPC drafters are drafting Swift significantly higher than Penny? Should we understand, like, okay, Swift is still the guy here. I'm not going to go out of my way to overdraft Rashad Penny by a round or two based on one day of training camp.
Yeah, so these situations, I like to again, another one is we brought up earlier is Miami, just all kinds of ambiguity associated with their backfield this season. So this situation with Philadelphia, I like to analyze ambiguity in backfields from a best case scenario range of outcomes perspective. So like, what is the best case scenario for Miami when we're talking about Devon Achane, when we're talking about Jeff Wilson, Raheem Mostert? It's probably that like one or the other of Raheem Mostert or Jeff Wilson gets hurt at some point in the season. And now we get that back, kind of fulfilling probably a 60 to 65% early down carry rate. The best case scenario for the Philadelphia backfield is that these guys are just hyper efficient. They provide random spike weeks, because you just mentioned Boston Scott. You mentioned Kenneth Gainwell. This backfield is highly unlikely to ever devolve even into like a two-headed backfield. So if that's the case, I typically look to like the cheapest one or two guys as places to take leverage stances on it. And that has led to fairly significant ownership for me personally on Rashad Penny up to this point.
And I think it's interesting too. I mean, just the way that this is going to shape out, because we are looking at this situation, Mark, and you know this because you draft, whatever you said at the top of the show, 17,000 best balls already under your belt.
Yeah,
But I mean, like the ADP, like based on training camp in Philadelphia, because everything's so fungible there, like the ADP is going to change on these Eagles running backs over the course, not only of the next couple of weeks, but maybe the next month, maybe the next month and a half, leading all the way up to when we're out at Planet Hollywood, drafting in the FFPC main event and the live events out there, which Better Sports Network is going to be there for. Can't wait for that. But I think that is going to be a fascinating situation. I hesitate to use the term league winner for any of those guys, but it is certainly, there's a non-zero chance of potentially Rashad Penny being a league winner for you this year, especially when you consider DeAndre Swift's history with the trainers room in Detroit. So something to be watching. Let's get into, let's talk about John Mechie here. And this is more of a question, not necessarily on John Mechie, but the Texans receivers in general. So Mechie was cleared for training camp. I've talked to a bunch of people, Mark, that are fans of Nico Collins this year. Obviously, Mechie's there. They bring in Robert Woods. I don't know if there's much to discuss there. The point of this is Brandon Cooks is still in Texas, but he's not in Houston anymore. There are a lot of possibilities for Houston this year at the wide receiver position. Some of them I didn't even name. Your thoughts on where the fantasy value lies on a wide receiver core for a team that could be, again, one of the worst in the league and could be throwing a lot in 2023 with a really talented quarterback throwing them the football.
Yeah, that's an interesting case study, because while we should expect Houston to be trailing relatively frequently this season, we look at the changes they made in the offseason. They brought in a new coaching regime. They drafted their quarterback of the future, and they paid significant attention because of the coaches that they brought in to the defensive side of the football. So I think their defense is probably going to be a little bit better over the second half of the season than people would give credit for now, sitting here in July. The other side of that is somebody's got to catch the football, right? Is it going to be Dalton Schultz? Is it going to be John Mechie? Is it going to be Nico Collins? I think the field with a relative high degree of certainty is saying that the most valuable pass catcher is going to be Dalton Schultz, because that's kind of the leader in the clubhouse as far as ADP goes. So I have taken that kind of another direction, and I have significant exposure to both John Mechie and Nico Collins, because I think they can be successful for different reasons. So I would expect Nico Collins to settle into that kind of Z-type wide receiver role that we were discussing before, probably higher per route upside type routes, the 7s to the 9s, the safety manipulator type roles, the busted coverage mass upside type routes. Whereas John Mechie, for a rookie quarterback who's relatively speaking undersized, there is, I think, merit to the discussion that an X-type possession style wide receiver could outperform current ADP. And I bought into that relatively early in this draft window, where John Mechie was going undrafted, or he was going in the 18th to 20 round. And as a way of just like a shot in the dark, like leveraged stance on the what ifs of the mass uncertainty that we're in Houston at the time. I kind of got off that because I saw Nico Collins. I saw a situation where he was likely to continue to increase in ADP at a relatively fast rate because of the hype that he was getting. So I tried to ride that up to a certain extent, because I knew it was equally as unlikely as he was moving up that John Mechie would move. So like this macro, like theoretical mindset allowed me to identify a situation where there probably was value. We didn't know where it was going to be, but I took the leverage stance on the undrafted guy at first. Then I saw a situation where Nico was probably going to jump multiple rounds, which he ended up doing, and kind of rid that up over the first 2-ish rounds in his kind of 3-round jump. And now I'm back to kind of drafting John Mechie, who has not really moved as much in ADP. So again, it's not about like this stance of like, I have to pick one that I know is going to win me something or outperform to this X degree. It's like, no, I'll just let the market kind of make those micro decisions within a certain time frame for me. and I'll just get my exposure as it comes.
Let me ask you this. I've been saying on broadcasts and radio appearances over the last month or so, Mark, that I can't remember a time when a number one receiver was being drafted as low as the Giants receivers this year. In other words, we are waiting until like the 15th, 16th, sometimes 17th round to see a Giants receiver go off the board. I thought that was really bad. Now I just looked at it now for the first time I'm seeing this. I'm kind of embarrassed to say it. John Mechie is the first Texans wide receiver being drafted this year in the FFPC best ball tournament, and he's not going until the mid-17th round. So this is super late value here. Or no, I take that back. Nico Collins is the 11th, and then Mechie in the 17th. But the guy we didn't bring up here, and this guy going after Robert Woods, allegedly, and I don't know how much truth there is to this, but I've heard a lot that C.J. Stroud wanted the Texans to draft Tank Dell. Tank Dell has now entered the fray as a receiver for the Texans that could be, playing in the slot, catching a lot of balls this year. And now he's going in the 20th round of the FFPC best ball tournament. What are your shares looking like with Tank Dell this year?
I'm about even the field, so about 8%. And I think that the reasoning there is, should an injury occur, he's not going to start the season seeing routine snaps. He's probably, if he breaks opening day, which we should expect, he's probably going to be in the gadgety type 20 to 40% snap rate range. And I expect, based on the personnel and their coaching staff, that we're likely to see elevated rates of 21 personnel and 12 personnel. So that means the opportunity for a guy like Tank Dell to get on the field at a significant rate to start the season is that much lower. That said, like if we see, and Robert Woods is ancient, he's been there, done that. We know that John Mechie probably has somewhat of a relatively compromised musculoskeletal system because of what his body has gone through. We saw the same thing kind of with James Conner, who had similar situation, and he's missed between 2 and 3 games since he came back per year. So there is the opportunity that John Mechie misses time. There's obviously the opportunity that Robert Woods breaks down at some point. So I think it's smart probably in that situation, because the opportunity cost is so low to acquire him, to have some shares of Tank up to this point.
We have so much more. We just scraped the surface tonight on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show here on the Better Sports Network. Hey, as a reminder, everybody, the Fantasy Alarm Fantasy Football Draft Guide and All-Pro subscription available to you right now. Fantasy Alarm's All-Pro subscription literally has everything you need for football season. The Fantasy Alarm Fantasy Football Draft Guide, a cheat sheet, your one-stop shop for dominating your drafts. And it's digital. It's being constantly updated with new information. You get the draft guide for $26.99 or get it free with a monthly or annual subscription to Fantasy Alarm. You can start your free FREE 7-day trial of Fantasy Alarm All-Pro and get immediate free access to the draft guide. We're going to get immediate and free access to the mind of Mark Garcia at HighLowFF on Twitter. We're going to pick his brain about Kyle Pitts. We're going to talk about the 49ers quarterback situation. We're going to get into Michael Thomas, the Saints receivers, and of course, because I'm in the shadows of Lambeau Field, we're going to talk about Jordan Love and that Packers offense as well. It's all going on right here on the Better Sports Network. Don't go anywhere. Eric Balkman, Mark Garcia, back after this.
Better Sports Network. Collectible moments.
Everybody up here at U.S. Cellular. Sox 5 runs, 6 hits. The 2-1 to Bartlett. Swing, chop to short. Ramirez has it, throws. Bartlett picks the perfect game. His second no-hitter. People going crazy here at U.S. Cellular. He's mobbed by his teammates. A perfecto.
Now there's a steal by Bird. Underneath the DJ, lays it in. Right out, 1 second left. What a play by Bird. Bird stole the impounding pass. Laid it up to DJ. DJ laid it up at him. And Boston has a 1-point lead with 1 second left.
Out of the I formation on first down. Peterson to carry, looking for running room on the right side. Has it to the 25, across the 30, across the 35, and out of bounds at the 40-yard line. Adrian Peterson has just gone over 2,000 yards for the season. The 7th man in NFL history to cross the 2,000-yard mark.
Well, a thundering ovation for number 66, Mario Lemieux.
Just the emotion I'm sure Mario is feeling in this place. You don't appreciate something until it's gone, and it's so great to have Mario back.
Yager turns around. Over to Lemieux. Mario Lemieux, his first goal in his comeback here tonight at the Mellon Arena. And the Penguins lead 3-0, and he is smiling like a butcher's dog, Mario Lemieux.
Oh, the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone. The Bears have scored, but the Bands are out on the field.
Pearson moves in front of the STP Dodge. Petty comes back to the inside. They almost touch as they move down low in the banking. They're going to be side by side as they exit the bank and head for the finish line.
Richard Petty goes back in front. They both spin. They're in the wall. Petty is slamming into the wall. He's coming down toward the finish line. Will he make it? Pearson is still running. The winner is car number 21. An amazing finish. Richard Petty's car demolished in the front end, as well as car number 21. An unbelievable finish, a terrible crash. David Pearson has won the Daytona 500. Leitner catches, comes down, dribbles, shoots, scores! Christian Leitner has hit the bucket at the buzzer! Pitched by Downing, swinging, there's a drive into left center field. That ball is going to be out of here. It's gone. It's 7-15. There's a new home run champion of all time, and it's Henry Aaron.
The most valuable player is Magic Johnson. 42 points, 15 rebounds, and 7 assists. He starts at center, plays forward and guard, and leads the Los Angeles Lakers to a world championship 123-107 over Philadelphia.
Whether you collect sports memorabilia, fantasy championships, or winning bet slips, talk about it on Better Sports Network. It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
19 minutes until the top of the hour here on the Better Sports Network. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show rolls on. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Hey, by the way, the FFPC, in case you didn't know, it's the home of season-long fantasy football. It features 2 separate $1 million grand prize contests, the FFPC main event and the Fantasy Pros Championship. Best ball leagues, dynasty leagues. Obviously, the Terminator tournament is getting underway in about a week here or so. FFPC Weekly Challenge, that's going to pop off as soon as the season starts as well. When you use promo code ALARM, that's ALARM at myffpc.com, myffpc.com, get your exclusive offer and $25 off your first FFPC entry of $35 or more. Go to myffpc.com, use promo code ALARM. Join tonight from one week season player profiler and of course why am I blanking on this? 33rd team. Holy cow. You know why I was blanking on this? Mark Garcia, by the way, follow him on Twitter at HiLowFF. Better Boss chimed in. If he had $1 million, and then my mind got working, God, what would I do with $1 million? What would HiLowFF do with $1 million grand prize this year?
I would buy a second home in the mountains because I am in the dreaded heat in Phoenix area. I would buy a second home in the mountains, and I would spend probably 3/4 of my time up there. I work exclusively from home. I left a 10-year career, active duty Navy, about 3 years ago to be with the family. So that would be like right in line. That's kind of the dream right now.
You know, for number one, thank you for your service. We appreciate it for sure. One of my buddies who's actually been in the Air Force for, I don't know, it's got to be coming up on 20 years now. He's from Wisconsin. He was stationed in Oklahoma for forever. And he's actually home this weekend. I'm going to hang out with him on Saturday. So I'm excited for that. Better Boss saying he'd buy a beach house. What part of the country, when you say the mountains, what part of the country, what part of the mountains are you going to be in? I assume Rocky Mountains, right?
No, just up in the Sierra, the Sierra Nevadas. I would probably be around somewhere in northern Arizona, northwest or northeastern California, somewhere like in the hardwoods or the pines, anything like that. I just love the smell. I just love taking the family up there, and the smell does it for me. And like when it rains, it's unlike anything else.
Oh, that's awesome, man. That is fantastic. Now I want that.
Yeah.
I got to figure a way to get $1 million so I can do that same thing. All right. So I want to talk with you right now about a guy that, and you know this because you've been playing fantasy football for forever. Kyle Pitts, I bring this up all the time on the show. This dude has been as polarizing as anybody, literally every year he's been in the NFL so far. And once again, he's polarizing this year. Just when we think he's going to settle in to a nice little ADP spot, we see that Drake London says that Kyle Pitts is actually, quote, still getting back to full health, which is not what you want to hear. He had the MCL injury halfway through the season. Maybe it was about a third of the way into the season last year. And Josh Kendall, who covers the Falcons for The Athletic, says that his training camp workload has been unclear. So we actually don't know what he's doing right now. So just when I think he's settling in as the tight end 5 at the end of the 4th round in the FFPC best ball tournament, now I'm thinking he might fall a little bit more. Kyle Pitts, to me, has always struck me as the type of player when you're trying to win a 6-figure, and now this season a 7-figure grand prize, as a pick to win type guy. Can you tell us a little bit about how you handle Kyle Pitts, how you have been handling Kyle Pitts in your best balls up until this news? And again, it's a player commenting on it. I never like to take injury stuff, from the player themselves or their teammates, because I think it's always a little skewed. How does this change anything, if any? How does this change your thought process on Kyle Pitts, if at all, going forward in your future best ball drafts, Mark?
It doesn't change it very much because we kind of have had this information up to this point. All the videos that we've seen of Kyle Pitts, like the I love me, look how quick I am videos that the players post throughout the offseason, he still had a knee brace on pretty much across the board. Every time we've seen Kyle Pitts go run a route, do conditioning or agility work, or catch the football. And that was, to me, a glaring, like, this guy is obviously still getting right. Regardless of how he looks, he's still getting right. And on FFPC, where it's obviously tight end premium, from a psychological aspect, and I just did my first podcast over, or video cast, whatever you want to call it, over at Roto Underworld, or Player Profiler, was on this exact thought process. And the psychological aspects of tight end premium, what the field does is it pushes up the top 12-ish tight ends about a round and a half when compared to other non-tight end premium sites. Once you get past like tight end 13, what we see is the ADP delta is about 2 full rounds across the board from tight end 13 plus. So to me, that says the psychological aspects of tight end premium is everyone must draft their tight ends and draft them early. When you look at the data of what tight end premium actually is doing for you, it's meant to reward volume at the tight end position, because obviously they are getting 1.5 point per reception. The tight ends that are not getting volume at the tight end position, they are still relatively going to perform around, from a single week range of outcomes perspective, which is more important in a format such as best ball, relatively going to perform around the same weekly range of outcomes as the other wide receivers and running backs that are going around them, until you get to rounds 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So the back end of the draft. That is where the tight ends are outperforming from a median projection standpoint, are outperforming the running backs and the wide receivers around them in ADP. So to me, Kyle Pitts has already been in this nebulous, artificially inflated per ADP range in FFPC, the tight end premium, where he's not a volume tight end, because for the simple fact that we are not expecting Atlanta to be this pass happy team. He's sharing kind of alpha duties already with another, second year elite athlete. And we know that this, Arthur Smith is just this guy who is not just going to open it up. And he proved that last season, where it was like, regardless of the game environment, regardless of the game flow, we're running the damn football. And that is going to set up our passing game.
And what's Bijan Robinson's impact on that, on Kyle Pitts? I mean, obviously it affects it. How big of an effect do you think it's going to take on him?
Bijan is that dude. And it's interesting because, like, they've got that dude at wide receiver, and they've got that dude at tight end from a just pure
if only they had that dude at quarterback.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's interesting too, because like now there's reports of Cordarrelle Patterson. He's in the running backs room, he's in the wide receivers room, and now he's in the tight ends room as well. It's like, what can't this dude do? So yeah, they've got playmakers pretty much across the board. They have an unproven very young quarterback, obviously, and they've got a head coach and an offensive coordinator who we know are going to, or we assume based on previous observations, we'll put it that way, that they're going to be extremely not averse to opening things up on their own, but they're going to be conservative in the way that they call games.
Yeah.
So yeah, all that kind of comes together. Kyle Pitts is in this like nebulous range of artificially inflated tight end zone where he's not a volume tight end to take advantage of the format. And he's being drafted around like wide receiver, top end wide receiver 2s and like bottom end wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 range. It's like, yeah, I have very little, exposure to Kyle Pitts. Yes, like he's got all the talent of the world, but that's not the only thing that matters when we analyze like a player's range of outcomes, because outside influences beyond their own skill level, their own agility and underlying metrics matter, because they are going to be, we'll say they're going to be a slave to those outside influences.
We have Randy Miller hanging out in the YouTube chat right now. He's been very patiently waiting an answer to this question. And I'm sorry, Randy, I'm only going to answer half of it here. He wants to know, hey, do you guys like Ridley or Judy? Now, I know, Mark, you have some thoughts on Calvin Ridley. We're saving that till next segment because I really want to explore, as Christopher Walken would say on that SNL Blue Oyster Cult cowbell sketch, really, we're going to explore the space on Calvin Ridley coming up in the second hour here. But let's talk about Jerry Jeudy, because the stuff I've been reading has been Cortland Sutton it hasn't looked this good in years. Russell Wilson's been looking at him a lot. I think Cortland Sutton was doing a lot of the stuff, or at least might be doing a lot of the stuff in this offense that Michael Thomas was doing in New Orleans. So your kind of thoughts on, and you could bring up Sutton if you want to talk about him, but specifically to answer Randy's question, Jerry Jeudy this year, who, by the way, in the FFPC best ball tournament right now is going as wide receiver 20. He's a mid-4th round pick, Mark.
I think that from a range of outcomes versus where, cost of acquisition standpoint, I really, really like Jeudy this season. And it all stems with the changes that Denver has made this offseason. I mean, they go from a guy who, Nathaniel Hackett in an offensive mind. We'll just leave it at that. Our thoughts about Nathaniel Hackett notwithstanding, very, very different from Sean Payton and Joe Lombardi, right? And you look at like what Sean Payton and Joe Lombardi have done with their time together in New Orleans. They were top 5 in scoring in all 5 of those seasons. When Sean Payton showed up in New Orleans, he took over a 3-13 team and took them to 10-6 the next year. Mm-hmm. So like this guy is a guy who has proven success, proven offensive success, and proven success in taking over a franchise that's kind of on the fritz and turning it around. So Jerry Jeudy, my thoughts and my takes on him is kind of a function of Denver being a far different team this season. And when you look at like implied win totals, when you look at Vegas betting lines, we're expecting, and the first person I think to shout this out was Dwayne McFarland, we're expecting them to increase their scoring by up to 35% this season. And yes, that's not hard to do when they were dead last in the damn league last season in points per game. But yeah, Jerry Jeudy, and the other aspect of that I think is super interesting is the fact that Sean Payton and Joe Lombardi went out and traded up into the second round to draft Marvin Mims. And why I think that is so interesting is they have been missing this downfield Z-type wide receiver on their offense. And what we saw last season under Nathaniel Hackett is they kind of forced Jeudy to mold into that role. It's clearly evident by the fact that in 2021 season, Jeudy had a 66.0% slot snap rate. Last season, that was down to about 39%. So he was being forced to play a position because he's fast that was basically the let's stretch the defense and manipulate opposing safeties, and the quarterback is supposed to do the rest with his eyes and body motion and foot and all that stuff, notwithstanding, whatever. We won't get into that. So the fact that they traded up to get Marvin Mims, who brings 4.38 speed, he brings this archetypical or Z-type wide receiver profile to the team. And then what else do they have outside of Jerry Jeudy and Marvin Mims? It's like they have Cortland Sutton and Tim Patrick, who are very, very similar in what they bring to an NFL offense. They're very, very like possession style routes. They're running the 4s to 6s. They are the guys that win high point body control, that type wide receiver. So the fact that this team and this new coaching staff went and traded up for Marvin Mims tells me that eventually, it might not start off the season like this, but eventually I think they want Marvin Mims on the field to give that downfield role, which would allow Jerry Jeudy to go back to a more natural slot snap rate of 65-70% slot snap rate, and have Cortland Sutton and Tim Patrick kind of doing the okie doke. Whoever is playing the X, we don't expect a dip in production. So I like Jeudy a lot through that thought process, because I expect him to go back to playing slot, which his archetype and his skill set is going to excel in that slot role much more than if he's playing on the perimeter.
Yeah, I think anytime, and this is like, obviously, I agree with you on Jeudy here, but I think the Broncos offense as a whole, if I can just piggyback on that, I think they're being so weighted down based on last year's performance that I think no matter what piece you're getting, because they're all so depressed, I think getting pieces of the Broncos offense is going to help you out, especially if you're playing kind of piecemeal where you have this big portfolio. I think it makes a lot of sense to do that.
Yeah.
Let's get it. I teased this earlier. The Giants wide receivers, Wan'Dale Robinson got placed on the PUP list, Mark. He tore his ACL in November, so I guess this is not a surprise. Sterling Shepard also recovering from a torn ACL. And the Giants receivers are laughing stock and a joke are not the right terms, but they do make me chuckle every time I look at him, because you have Waller, who I think is going to have a great season. Barkley, who I think as long as he stays healthy should be the focal point of this offense. It's going to run through him. But on the perimeter, man, I mean, Hodgins, Paris Campbell, Jamison Crowder, Darius Slayton, Jalen Hyatt. I mean, all these guys, like, I don't know what to expect from any one of them. Are any of these guys standing out to you? How have you been handling it when you're drafting all these teams? Are you just trying to make about even, shares of all these guys, or has one Giants receiver been drafted by you more often than others?
Yeah, there has been. And when you look at, again, I want to analyze where that team is at, kind of first and foremost, before breaking down like the individual players. And from an offensive efficiency perspective, the Giants were 5th last year in red zone's touchdown rate. So when they entered the red zone, and we should expect that level of red zone efficiency under Brian Dable and Mike Kafka there. So the fact that they were already efficient in the red zone with this hodgepodge group of pass catchers, and it was just like Saquon and everybody else. The fact that they went out and got this mega talented red zone threat in Darren Waller, I want all of it. And the fact that he's still going off the board at the tight end 7, tight end 8 range.
Tight end 7 at the 505 in the best ball tournament at FFPC right now.
Yeah, I think that's mega value. And it's this idea that offense is now, based on the pieces they have, is Darren Waller, Saquon Barkley, and Daniel Jones, and then everybody else. And I want the cheapest couple of members of that kind of core, which is primarily Daniel Jones and Darren Waller. And I do have exposure to Saquon because I think you have to after what we saw last season with Dable and and Kafka. So when you look at we'll just call them the tertiary pieces, the rest of that bunch, it's like, what do we know? We probably know to a certain degree of certainty that Darius Slayton is probably going to be on the field because he is that like downfield 7 to 9 type route guy that is manipulating safeties. And that's extremely important. And I keep bringing that up in this show because it's extremely important to a new age current NFL offense, because what have we seen? We've seen defenses transition to a higher rate of 2 high and cover 2 style defenses. So 2 safeties on the field. When you get that, what does that do for a defense? It provides flexibility so they can cheat one of those guys into the box if it's expected to be a run play, and they can get 7 to 8 bodies in the box. They can play. They can do everything from like play cover 2 press. They can play quarters from that, what it looks like to a quarterback pre-snap. They can do all kinds of different things, and it all comes from a very similar base defensive formation. So now that the the defenses in today's NFL game have transitioned to this like too high set as their base. What that means is these like safety manipulators, Z-type wide receivers that are used in routes to draw one of those safeties to a certain part of the field is highly important to an offense. The other counterbalances to that now too high look is offenses are running pre-snap motion at a higher rate, and it is up to the quarterback via his eyes, via his feet, and how his hips are set, because now that's what new age cornerbacks are trained to look. It's eyes, it's hips, it's feet. And so the third part of like manipulating safeties is now up to, it's like the Z-type wide receivers, it's pre-snap motion, and it's the quarterback's eyes, hips, and feet. So that's why like those guys are so important. So I would expect Darius Slayton to kind of lead the team in snaps at the wide receiver position. And then behind that, it's like, I don't know.
and at that point, like we're picking at nits here because all these guys are going super late in the FFPC best ball tournament. I want to fly through these last few points, and I'm going to fly. Mark, you don't feel like you have to because I really want to pick your brain on this.
Yeah.
Josina Anderson from CBS Sports said Josh Jacobs did not report to Raiders training camp. There are 3 Raiders being drafted in the FFPC best ball tournament right now, led by Josh Jacobs, running back 9 at the 304. After that, running back 59, Zamir White. So you're looking way later with him as he's going in the 16th round. Amir Abdullah is basically free in the 19th round at running back 81. Can you talk, maybe not so much about Abdullah, but is Jacobs a buying opportunity right now because you don't think he's going to sit out? And then what do we do with Zamir White, who, if Jacobs does sit out, I mean, we've seen these guys sit out and then come back, and whether they really get hurt or whether they're not going to try to overexert themselves to play through injury, it opens an opportunity for the guy behind the guy, which is Zamir White in this case.
Yeah, I was late to the Zamir White train, but I think that you would be wise to start getting some exposure to White if you have not already. Josh Jacobs holdout notwithstanding, I don't think we have to make a distinction or a ones or zeros binary stance on that. But just the fact that prior to this season, his most touches in a single season in his career was 306 when he had 273 carries and 33 catches in 2020. Then he goes to a down year in 2021, and he comes back on fire and sees 393 running back touches. From a strictly statistical sense, running backs coming off of running backs not named Derrick Henry coming off of that type of workload typically see a regression in their efficiency metrics. So the fact that he's in the 3rd round, I think it's okay because I think that it's kind of baked into that price, particularly coming off of a running back who's coming off of the NFL rushing title. But I think that you can take shots on him if he falls, but my personal stance is I'm not necessarily overly excited to draft him because the fact that there's 2 parts of like the ambiguity that you have to get through for him to achieve ceiling again. It's like he has to get through falling off from an efficiency metric after 293 touches, and he has to get through this this holdout nonsense.
So let me ask you this, and I'm gonna turn these last 2 points, Mark, into one question here for you. Number one, John Lynch said that Brock Purdy's been cleared to practice. He's ready to go, which is great news for the Niners offense, and it's great news for people who have been investing in Brock Purdy early on. Packers head coach today, Matt LaFleur, said that Jordan Love, quote, has complete command of the offense. So if I pit these 2 against each other, which a lot of people are doing, because Purdy right now is going as quarterback 23 at the 1404, Jordan Love just ahead of him, quarterback 20 at the 1306. So basically less than a round is separating these guys. Who do you like better this year? And you can't say, well, Bulky, I got shares of Love and Purdy. Like if for all our viewers who are watching this, they can only draft one of these players because they're only doing one draft. Who would you recommend they go with, Love or Purdy?
I think it depends on the format. Well, I'll use that as my out. For best ball, I think the higher potential for ceiling is probably with Love on a weekly perspective. And in a format like redraft, so like the Fantasy Pros Players Championship or the main event, I think that you can make a case to kind of side with Purdy in that discussion because he's probably going to be much more consistent as far as fantasy output goes. So I think I would side with the format being the decider for me.
Okay.
As my answer to that. Yeah. So a little bit of a cop-out answer, but I think less so than you you were trying to prevent.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, because I actually like both these players this year, and people ask me because I'm right by Green Bay basically, and they ask me all the time about Jordan Love, and I've been saying this since last year. Like, I think Love's going to be okay. I don't think he's going to be great, but like year one as a first-time starter with all these young guys, I think he's going to be okay. Now, the reports that we've had early in training camp was that he had a bad day yesterday. Today he was really good, but his team let him down. Like Watson dropped the pass, Musgrave dropped the pass today. Not Romeo Dobbs. AJ Dillon dropped the pass today as well. So his cohorts kind of let him down. And I think you kind of got to understand, like, this is going to happen throughout the season with Love. Yeah. It's just that's the way it is. But I do think he's going to be all right. Quarterback 20, the price is right there. And I like Brock Purdy where he's going as well. I like the fact that we still have 55 minutes to go on this show tonight. And we have so much more to get to. It's going to be so much fun. I'm talking with High-Low FF, a.k.a. Mark Garcia, from the 33rd team, from Player Profiler, and from 1 Week Season. Follow him on Twitter at High-Low FF. Mark, when we come back, let's get into where do you stand on. I want to talk. We didn't get a chance to talk about Michael Thomas and Kadarius Toney. We're going to talk about them in the next segment. I know you have some pretty strong feelings in Calvin Ridley as well as Amari Cooper. We're going to get into them as well. That is all coming up. You're watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show live here on the Better Sports Network. Eric Balkman and Mark Garcia right back after this.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman.
Breece Hall right now, and I've talked to plenty of high-stakes players. I'm sure you have too, Kev. Had Hall not torn his ACL last year, he might have been the 101 in drafts this year. That's how good he was looking last year, and obviously with the addition of Aaron Rodgers. At the 305, running back 11 behind Derrick Henry and Ramondre Stevenson, right ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs and Najee Harris. Your thoughts on him as a mid-third round pick? How have you been attacking him? Have you been getting him at that spot so far this year?
Yeah, if I start out with two wide receivers, Breece Hall is right at the top of the queue coming into the third. If I knew he'd be healthy for week one, I was still a little.
Well, he'd be going higher than the mid third.
Right. He may go 101 or RB1 at least.
Yeah.
But I don't think we know that even if he's healthy in spring and the summer.
Mm-hmm.
I still like if I'm running a team, if I'm the coach, I'm bringing him back slow. Like he's on a pitch count. Like I want him for the end of the season because I got Aaron Rodgers for the playoffs, right? Like even if he's fully healthy, I would work him in slow. But that is actually what you want. Like he's still going to get the high value touches. So yeah, if we know he's healthy, he's a first rounder. So like if he's sitting there in the third, especially when I get two wide receivers to start, I'll take Hall all day.
Yeah, it almost makes you think that the uncertainty with Breece Hall has made him unfairly fall too far, right? Like because we're talking about the team here in June. They're still hoping that he's ready for week one. This is not, we'll see what happens. We're taking it day by day. We're liking how he's coming along. No, they still think by week one. And the fact that we have that timeline, I think, maybe bumps him up, especially as the drafting season gets deeper and deeper here in July and August. Maybe we start seeing him go up the boards as well.
It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
8 minutes past the top of the hour. Don't forget, Garrett Price and those Dynasty Nerds are going to be coming up at the top of the hour. Don't go anywhere. Until then, we're just going to have to hold it down here with Mark Garcia and myself. Mark Garcia, you follow him on Twitter at HighLowFF from the 33rd team, Player Profiler, and 1 Week Season. So I don't think I've ever asked you this. I don't know the answer. Where did the HighLowFF Twitter handle come from?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that I spent 10 years active duty. I was a backseater flying F-18s for the Navy, so that was actually my call sign from that time. Yeah.
All right, so everybody asked you this. I'm going to do it as well. Top Gun Maverick, yay or nay?
What I will say, I enjoyed the newer one more than the original.
Okay.
Because the actual footage that they were using from the cockpit and the way that they were able to get those IMAX Dolby digital cameras mounted in the cockpit, that flight footage was actually very, very good. So that was a cool experience, and it kind of related pretty well to kind of what we experienced when we were flying.
So is that what are those movies treated by by you guys as pilots? Like, is that just like, because use the example of Draft Day, right? You and I, we watch Draft Day and we're like, this is hokey as hell.
Yeah.
But it's still entertaining, right? Is that sort of the approach for the Top Gun movies, the two Top Gun movies?
Yeah, it's the exact same. I mean, if there's a movie made about something that you have become an expert at, you just sit there picking holes in the whole thing. But I thought that I at least enjoyed this Top Gun Maverick because of the flight footage was so good.
That's good. I'm glad to hear it. And we could do a lot on Top Gun here.
Yeah.
You know what's funny about this is I did not like, so I'm 43 years old. So when Top Gun came out, I was like, I don't know, like in my early teens or not even to a teenager. And so I never really got into it. I saw it years later. And I was kind of like, whatever. And then I just saw Top Gun Maverick within the last 2 weeks for the first time.
Yeah.
And I thought it was cool. But at the same time, like, I'll tell you this, like, I'm trying to get through Oppenheimer right now. And I know this is a second Oppenheimer reference. I had to go, I'm going to see it again. I'm going through Oppenheimer's Wikipedia page right now, just so I have a full breadth of information of what this guy did and who he was about. Because, man, Christopher Nolan makes a movie and he's jumping all over the place.
Yeah.
And, like, I don't know what's going on. So I got to be better prepared for my second viewing of Oppenheimer. Nobody cares about this. I'll tell you something that they do care about. Let's get into it right now. Dynasty Fantasy Football. Register for Dynasty startups at myffpc.com. They start at $100. They go all the way up to a $5,000 entry fee. Dynasty has been going on with the FFPC for little over a decade, and well over 1,400 leagues. 0.0 of them have ever folded. That's at myffpc.com. Go Mach 10 with your Dynasty Fantasy Football Dynasty Fantasy Football love over at myffpc.com. All right, we got to get into this. We touched on this earlier. Let's get into a where do you stand on. And I know, and before I get into this, I preface the viewers here. You do not usually take hard stances on players, right? This is something that you usually shy away from, right?
You, at least at this point in the draft season, because there's so much unknowns, there's so much uncertainty, there's so much ambiguity that I like to just take targeted risk profile stances where it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Once we start getting to where ADP is a little bit more accurate into, the late August timeframe, early September timeframe, when a lot of the high stakes leagues are kicking off, that's kind of when my draft strategy and overall like macro process changes to a lot more like, I know better than you and I can beat you mano a mano. Right now it's heavy theoretical and it's just building a portfolio.
But it's about to switch, right? You're
Yeah.
Again, Oppenheimer, you're about to get off of the chalkboard and get into the lab with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Which I'm looking forward to. And let me ask you this with Kadarius Toney right away. He underwent knee surgery. This is, sort of, I don't want to say it's a running joke, but the running gag with Kadarius Toney is that he's always in the training room, and then sure enough, right away in training camp this year, tweaks his knee. Now he's undergoing surgery. We don't know exactly how long he's going to be out. It doesn't sound like it's super serious, but it's significant at least. Where do you stand on Kadarius Toney this year? And before you answer that question, Mark, I'll tell you in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament, wide receiver 39 over the last 3 days in the early 8th round.
Yeah, so he's. I would expect him to continue to fall as well. Probably, I've seen him go as late in the 95 to 99 overall ish range. So my thoughts prior to him getting injured was there's not many guys that are wide receivers wise that are being drafted around him that provide as much upside baked into that profile. Obviously, there's significant concern. And so I identified Kadarius Toney as one of the wider range of outcomes type players, both from an individual week and a season-long perspective. So like both of those caveats are important in a game like Best Ball, where they both matter pretty significantly. And then considering the fact that Kansas City's, playoff schedule, their week 15, week 16, week 17 for these playoff type contests, kind of breeds is a solid breeding ground for some high scoring type games. So that led me to I was in on Kadarius Toney. I'm probably going to continue to draft him as he slides where it makes sense. And I think I was at 14-15% Kadarius Toney, so almost double the field. So not overly crazy.
But now you said in the first hour you have the opportunity, and you're probably going to take advantage of the opportunity to get more Rashee Rice on your team.
Yeah.
Are you going to have some Rashee Rice, Kadarius Toney, and maybe Patrick Mahomes stacks?
Yes. And I started off by attacking Kansas City, and this was before before even FFPC contests were open and before the NFL schedule was released, right when the first best ball contest dropped. I was targeting teams and divisions to try and back my way into correlation. And I was targeting Kansas City and the AFC West very heavily.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing so, and I was sprinkling in 18th round Jerick McKinnon because he was going undrafted because he wasn't signed yet with the team. And I was drafting a lot of Kadarius Toney and doing that with that. And I thought you could do that profitably. And when there was a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty with everything. And I thought, this is my time. And I kind of carried that mindset through with Kadarius Toney because he still had this extremely wide range of outcomes. And now I can play catch up. Whereas before I was drafting Jerick McKinnon heavily, I can play catch up with Deneric Prince, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And I can also play catch up with guys like Rashee Rice that are still relatively affordable.
I have a feeling this next guy I'm going to ask you about, you are not playing catch up with. Based on what I've seen you do, I've seen you tweet about Amari Cooper, who's going as the wide receiver 17 at the 404 right now. Seems like you're pretty high on him, so I assume your portfolio is chock full of Cooper right now, right?
Yeah, I've had to take a very mindful eye approach to my Amari Cooper exposure. And this is another situation, another team, not to the extent of the Denver Broncos, but another team that we should expect to take significant steps forward this season. And Amari Cooper, just as we spoke about Jerry Jeudy being kind of the alpha type guy in Denver, that's Amari Cooper in Cleveland. And if we expect the offense to improve rather dramatically, we can expect that rising tide to raise all ships, but that is going to benefit the alpha probably the most. And it's like they have three alphas in that offense, and they brought in Elijah Moore. I mean, you talk about Nick Chubb seeing an expanded role, primarily through the air in a format like FFPC, where it's full PPR for everyone not a tight end. That is valuable. David Njoku, his underlying metrics over the past 3 seasons really have been off the charts, and it's a matter of opportunity and kind of putting it all together. And then Amari Cooper. So I've been targeting that offense, which means I've been targeting Amari Cooper rather heavily as well.
And that makes perfect sense that you do. And just real quick, piggyback on that. Elijah Moore, I saw the blurb today. I can't remember which Browns beat writer reported it, or maybe it was actually a comment from Stefanski that they're moving more all over, outside, inside, in the backfield even. What does that do for Elijah Moore for you? Is this a guy that you're going to bump up in as far as your shares go and make sure you get more of them?
Yeah, I think so. And I think I took an I know nothing Jon Snow approach about Elijah Moore. I was like, I have no idea. He's super talented. His draft profile was off the charts, and he's entering a breakout third season. All this is like positives, but it's like he just changed teams and we don't know, and all this ambiguity that's also associated with that. I kind of just took this I know what I know what I don't know approach with Elijah Moore, and that's heavy theoretical background. And I just said, I'll just keep it around the field right now, and then I can adjust as we start to get more information. But I didn't want to be playing catch up and drafting him 2% across a massive portfolio. I wanted to be around even the field to where I could adjust it either up or down as I needed to.
So that's the Browns. Randy Miller has been patiently waiting for your answer on this, Mark Garcia here. Calvin Ridley. He wants to know if you like him this year. I'm going to let you tell the viewers why you absolutely love or why you absolutely hate Calvin Ridley at his current ADP, which, by the way, in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament, Calvin Ridley Wide receiver 19 at the 405. At Hilo FF, what do you think?
Yeah, so the specific question was Calvin Ridley or Jared Jeudy, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, or alluded to it at least a couple times. I said something on Twitter to the effect of, I am not taking hard stances at this point in the draft season, but there's one situation where I cannot wrap my head around, and that's Calvin Ridley versus Amari Cooper. And I said I'm taking Amari Cooper 100% of the time there. Similar situation with Jerry Jeudy. I love Calvin Ridley, the person, the player, his athletic profile. I do not love the price, and I honestly do not love the situation because he is entering a rather crowded pass catching core. And if you look at the underlying metrics of Jacksonville's offense as a whole, while they were in the top half of the league in pass attempts per game, they were near the middle of the league in pace of play, and they were in the bottom half of the league in a lot of important like passing metrics. So you're basically, to me, Calvin Ridley, and we talk about ranges of outcomes. Calvin Ridley was probably being drafted towards his 60 to 65% range of outcomes, which means 65% of the time he's going to land lower than that projection. So while, and again, this is important from a theoretical sense to think about players when we know so little, and it's hard to say, yes, projections are getting better and analysis is getting better across the industry, but we don't know, like, especially like right after the NFL draft, when these major best ball contests started, or when FFPC's best ball draft launched a few weeks after that, like you have so little information that all you can do is place leverage bets on players per their range of outcomes projections. And Calvin Ridley was a guy, you look at his Vegas receiving total, you look at like all these predictive statistics and metrics, was being drafted over his median projection to begin with. So that is a situation where you're already behind the curve when you talk about managing a portfolio. So that was a very easy stance for me to take. He's kind of already being drafted above his median projection. You compare him to a guy like Mike Evans, where his receiving line this season is set at 950 yards in Vegas. So what does that mean statistically? That means that Vegas, which is incentivized to be as accurate as possible now because the betting market is blowing up. So they're at risk to lose more money if they are inaccurate in those initial lines that are set. So that fact, paired with the fact that like Mike Evans' receiving yardage total is at 950 this season, that gives him a 47.6% chance to eclipse 1,000 yards receiving for the 10th consecutive season, which is insane to even think about.
Yeah.
But that's already, his ADP is in the, depending on where you're drafting, the 5th to 6th round range. That is already a similar profile to a range of, as far as a range of outcomes is concerned, to what Calvin Ridley is being projected for. And you're getting him at a 3-ish, 2.5, 3 round discount. So
Totally.
Yeah, so that's kind of my stance on Calvin Ridley. I've been forcing some in weekly winners in these other different kind of formats as my hedge. And I think you can do that smartly. And I'm doing something similar to Breece Hall, as we talked about earlier, is like, that's where I'm getting my hedge because their single game, their single week ceiling is elite. So I still want exposure through that. And I'm just choosing to get my exposure in different ways, I think.
I want, as long as we're talking about Mike Evans, let's go into this Buccaneers conversation here, because we don't know if it's going to be Kyle Trask. We don't know if it's Baker Mayfield. I've heard from smart people it's going to be Trask. I've heard from smart people it's going to be Mayfield. I don't know. But that doesn't matter for us, because if we're drafting right now, which if you're watching this, you are drafting right now, what do you do with Evans and Godwin here? And this could be a combined conversation, could be a separate conversation between the two. I feel like you've already touched on Evans. wide receiver 33 at the 703 in the FFPC best ball tournament. Chris Godwin, not that much further ahead of him. Again, full PPR in the FFPC best ball tournament. Chris Godwin, wide receiver 30 at the 604. So a little bit less than a round separates these two. Do you still like Evans over Godwin, or is there a reason to like Godwin there around earlier, Mike?
Yeah, so this is just a situation where I'm taking the scoring format into consideration a little bit heavier than I think the field is. So you look at like FFPC, they're within a round, and you look at Underdog, and they're within a round. But even on Underdog, which is half PPR, Chris Godwin is going almost a full round ahead of Mike Evans. And it's like, what gives, guys? That's completely ass backwards. But so yeah, I'm just letting the certainty from the field kind of influence those decisions for me per the scoring format of the contest that I'm playing.
Keenan Allen, and God bless the Chargers offense this year. I know I'm going to have a lot of shares of them. It's probably going to blow up in my face because it seems like everybody's on the Chargers offense this year. But I'm going to tell you what, man, there's no team that I like top to bottom as far as the skill position guys go than the Chargers. Herbert, Eckler, Gerald Everett at tight end, Mike Williams, Quentin Johnston, Josh Palmer even as a late, like if you're drafting in the 28 round FFPC best ball tournament, or not best ball tournament, but the 28 round FFPC best ball drafts. I think there's something to be said for Josh Palmer. And then the guy I'm going to ask you about right now, Keenan Allen, going off the board as wide receiver 16, I believe. Yeah, wide receiver 16 at the 311. Your thoughts on Keenan Allen this year and why people should or should not be in business with him at the end of the third, early fourth, Mark?
Yeah, I think this depends on the format as well. In something like the main event or the Fantasy Pros Players Championship, I think Keenan Allen makes a lot of sense there for the consistent PPR production. In a format like best ball, and you can compare Keenan Allen to like guys like DJ Moore, similar situation, obviously not on the same level as their offense overall, but these guys who are relatively consistent producers almost regardless of their situation, but have very rarely provided top end like spike week type production. Those guys should like immaterially take a slight hit in valuation in best ball, which favors the potential for these spike weeks to happen. And they're not being. So I have very little, or I shouldn't say very little. I am under the field on Keenan Allen. I'm under the field on DJ Moore for those reasons. And you mentioned, I know this is like the wide receiver episode, but you mentioned one of my top targets on that offense earlier in Gerald Everett and also in Austin Eckler. And some of these situations that we've covered, I should say that I did rankings for only the second time this offseason, did my own projections and own rankings. And Austin Eckler was my RB1 out of those rankings. And this is when the contract negotiation stuff was still going on and all this stuff was still happening. And Gerald Everett was way, way, way ahead of consensus as well.
Really?
So I have fairly significant stances, or I guess as far as my portfolio goes, on those two guys. And then I'm kind of just like mixing in the three main wide receivers from there.
And it makes sense. And it makes perfect sense. When you think that the offense is going to be great, grab pieces of it when you can, especially if you're going to be a volume player this year, which I know, again, a lot of our viewers are. It makes perfect sense. We talked about underrated guys, and Gerald Everett was one of them. Where do you stand on a guy like Tyler Lockett, who to me, and I know Dan Williamson from the GOAT District he's been talking about Tyler Lockett for years and years and years, continues on this year. Tyler Lockett, wide receiver 31 in the FFPC best ball tournament. He is going at the 609, right between Chris Godwin and Marquise Brown. Mark Garcia, where do you stand on Tyler Lockett this year?
Yeah, so we mentioned a couple of times now this idea of like median projections versus ADP and then ranges of outcomes. Tyler Lockett is probably a guy that is being drafted below his median projection, which gives you this inherent value just taking him around ADP. And it gives you increased outs, basically. I think as a whole, probably the Seattle pass offense is probably being overdrafted relative to their median outcome, because it's basically saying that Geno Smith is going to have a repeat performance of a ninth year breakout, which is like, that's never happened in the history of the NFL. And so we have no data to support it, but that's basically where that pass catching core as a whole is being drafted as. It's like we expect Geno to be the same that he was last year, and that was considering the fact that he broke out relatively in his 9th season in the NFL. But I think the fact that Tyler Lockett is 3rd off the board in pass catchers in that offense is a mistake. And he's one of these guys that is a nice piece to get exposure to in a format like Best Ball, where it's like he can provide those mega spike week type things. He's been like an overall wide receiver in a given week. He's been top 12 at a high rate. And he's a guy that, like, I think you need to have exposure to this season.
I want to talk about the Baltimore passing game right now. And this has been fascinating to see this whole situation evolve over the course of the offseason. You know, they signed Odell Beckham, give him all that guaranteed money, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Then they draft Zay Flowers. And then, you know, as I look at it right now, I was like, God, there's going to be so many different players there to target. But now I feel like it's kind of deciding for you, right? Because if you look at the Baltimore pass catchers, you have Mark Andrews going in the FFPC best ball tournament in the middle of the 2nd round. Okay, I get it. Makes perfect sense that he's tight end too. Then you look at J.K. Dobbins. He's now going in the 6th round. He's probably going to fall a little bit more with this PUP news. Rashad Bateman, middle of the 10th round. Now he's on PUP, and we don't really know what's going on with him there. I think he's still on PUP. Is he still on PUP, Mark?
Yeah.
Okay. So we don't know what's going on there. Beckham, it keeps slipping in drafts. He's now fallen to the 11-12 turn. Isaiah Likely going in the 17th round. Melvin Gordon in the 19th round. And then who's the sort of the last guy standing right there? It's Zay Flowers.
Zay Flowers,
the 1st round pick, wide receiver 46 at the 908. I was confused about this Ravens receiving core, pass catching core a month or so ago. Now I feel like I'm getting more clarity on it. And the clarity to me is Zay Flowers. Where do you stand on Zay Flowers?
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because I think that's how almost everybody felt. Because when these contests opened, it was like Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, and Odell Beckham were all like back to back off the board
exactly.
at wide receiver. And now we're starting to get that disparity in ADP. And this is another case similar to Denver, similar to Cleveland, where we can expect the pass offense to be more valuable this season from the Baltimore Ravens, considering Todd Monken, considering everything that team has done this offseason. And if we just take that at face value, it could be a case of a rising tide lifts all ships. And I think there is value in Zay Flowers at ADP. I think there is value in Rashad Bateman at ADP. And I think there's value in Odell Beckham at ADP in best ball format. And I would also extend that to redraft or season long formats as well, because it's a situation where like the uncertainty surrounding Rashad Bateman and Odell Beckham are almost strictly associated with their health. And it's like in a start sit format, you can make those decisions. They're playing or they're not. And if they're playing, you should be able to insert them in some form into your lineup. So yeah, I think that entire wide receiver room has value, and I've been attacking it as such. But it's basically just if any of those guys are falling past ADP, it's just like, okay, I'll make it work on this roster.
I think that I'm going to combine a couple of things here on this next point, and it's about the Saints receivers. I want to ask you about Michael Thomas, who's battled a lot of injuries over the course of the last couple of years. But when he was peak Michael Thomas, ain't nobody better than that dude as far as fantasy points go. So I want to ask you about Michael Thomas here. Where do you stand on him? And then also his real life teammate. Where do you stand on Rashid Shaheed? Because there is a significant amount of draft capital separating these two. We all know Chris Olave is the first receiver off the board from New Orleans at the 212, wide receiver 13 overall. Michael Thomas is a 9th round pick. Rashid Shaheed is a 15th round pick. So Mark Garcia, where do you stand on Michael Thomas? Where do you stand on Rashid Shaheed?
I think I like all the wide receivers. I should say I think I like all the pass catchers in that offense, down to perennial troll Taysom Hill. I like Juwan Johnson because the offseason moves that they made are very clear that he is most likely still the head or the lead pass catching tight end. Whereas like they go and sign Foster Moreau, and then you see Taysom Hill's ADP be rather influenced, and Juwan Johnson's took like 3 weeks for Juwan Johnson's ADP to move a hair. It's like we would have thought that Juwan Johnson would have been the one more affected by Foster Moreau coming to town, and whereas Taysom Hill, I don't know, the whole situation was kind of backwards to me. The other piece to that is, who is Derek Carr, their new quarterback? And Derek Carr is a very, very astute downfield passer. He likes to take shots downfield, and he's rather good at it from an efficiency metric standpoint. So that very naturally fits into the skill set and what Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed bring to the offense. But I think that from a per game upside standpoint, I think there's also value to Michael Thomas at ADP, because he is so dominant through an area of the game that is very, very hard to be dominant in. And that's tight spaces. That is body control. That is beating island man coverage, because he just has the football smarts and the body archetype and the wherewithal to basically beat man coverage, to beat zone coverage. And he can do that consistently. So for Michael Thomas, I think it's just a matter of, is he healthy? He's only appeared in 10 NFL contests over the last 3 seasons. So it's like, what can we expect? And were he coming into this season playing a full healthy season last year, he would probably be going 3 to 4 rounds earlier, somewhere in that range. So I think there's opportunity. There's opportunity in all of those profiles in that offense this year.
Well, let me ask you this. This is tight ends, but still a pass catcher. And I say this semi tongue-in-cheek, Mark, but Juwan Johnson was a guy that was really climbing up boards 2 or 3 weeks ago. He's plateaued out a little bit, but there's still a lot of people that like him. The Saints signed Jimmy Graham today. Now, I'm not, listen, here's the thing. Nobody's targeting Jimmy Graham. Nobody's believing that anything is going to happen with Jimmy Graham this year from a fantasy standpoint. But is there something to be said for, man, I got to knock Juwan Johnson down a little bit more because they added Graham? I always say this, regardless of what we think and what we can see, it really doesn't matter. It matters what the coaches and the players and everybody in that locker room thinks. And if Graham's going to be out there more, that's going to hurt Johnson. How does the Graham signing affect Juwan Johnson for you in fantasy?
I think it has to a little bit, and because of who Jimmy Graham is, and he's like this red zone threat, I think he's probably going to be reserved for a handful of red zone packages per week is probably how they play Jimmy Graham. If he plays this season, which I think he's based on the contract likely to. So that has to influence Juwan Johnson in particular, because so much of his value last season was derived from touchdowns. And Juwan Johnson is a guy in tight end premium format that I am completely fine avoiding almost at cost, because he is not going to ever be a volume type tight end. You can get guys much later, like Logan Thomas is an example that's going way, way down draft boards, who has a similar volume projection to a guy like Juwan Johnson. And then if you think that Juwan Johnson is going to be influenced in the red zone based on Jimmy Graham, based on Foster Moreau, based on Taysom Hill, this kind of somewhat robust list of names that they have in New Orleans now, that's where he was deriving a lot of his fantasy value last season. I think he scored 7 touchdowns. So that's got to be at least somewhat concerning. And it's interesting that he was it took Jimmy Graham to kind of halt his rise in ADP there for a while.
Listen, there is something to be said, and I wish we had more time to get into the tight ends. We've been so wide receiver heavy on the show tonight, but that's okay, because I feel like the last few episodes we haven't gotten into wide receivers as much, so we're doing it for you tonight. Now, listen, coming up, running backs are going to take the focus. We're going to talk about the FFPC best ball targets and fades. We're going to talk about guys like Ezekiel Elliott, Isaiah Pacheco, Javonte Williams. Might still get back into Gerald Everett because I want to slip into that conversation a little bit more. He is Mark Garcia from Player Profiler, from 1 Week Season, from the 33rd Team. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Don't go anywhere. We're going to step out, take our final break. We'll be right back right after this here on the Better Sports Network.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman.
The Detroit Lions select Sam Laporta, tight end, Iowa.
Had to go with your boy Sam Laporta there to pair with TJ Hawkinson.
Sammy.
I couldn't double down on rookie tight ends. I think that's taking it a little too far.
This could be one of the most exciting rookie tight end classes in a while, just based on the archetypes of these guys, of the Dalton Kincaids and the Sam Laportas. Obviously, Green Bay drafted two themselves with Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. So after Kincaid, I would say is probably the consensus with tight ends. Like, who do you like as far as the best ball, like end of best ball? Do you like Laporta, or is there anybody else you like more?
I do like Laporta. We're looking for guys that can be a top 2 target on their team. So any path, any argument you could make, right? So you can make the argument that Dalton Kincaid is going to be a top 2 target with after Stephon Diggs. You can make an argument that with Jamison Williams suspended, now Sam Laporta is just going to play straight up wide receiver. He looks like a wide receiver. Why can't he line up out wide at split end, right? It's like Marvin Jones and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I would also throw another name in the ring, and I don't mind, since we're doing this for the fans, for the kids. He's still on the board. Luke Musgrave on your Packers. They're not super loaded at wide receiver. We like the guy Reed they drafted, but you never know. So why can't Luke Musgrave be a big slot? In fact, they drafted 2 tight ends, Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. Tucker Kraft is more of an inline guy. They might just go 2 tight ends right away. Tucker Kraft inline, Luke Musgrave in the slot. Why can't he be a target monster for Jordan Love? So those are the guys, those are the conditions that you need for a rookie tight end to succeed. They need to not only be the best pass catching tight end on the team, but a top 2 pass catcher on the team outright. That's how you get Kyle Pitts. Evan Ingram as a rookie was top 5 because Odell Beckham Jr. hurt his knee 4 weeks into the year. So that's the formula. We're looking for guys that can actually be a top target right away. Otherwise, we're playing the sit and wait long-term game, which is what you're doing with guys like Michael Mayer.
High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Hey, I want to encourage each and every one of you to, because we've been going so hard on wide receivers tonight, go to fantasyalarm.com. Andrew Cooper, the lead NFL analyst for Fantasy Alarm, has a fantastic article about identifying wide receiver values using NFL player prop totals, something Mark Garcia touched on with Mike Evans earlier on in the show. Coop is going to be coming on this show probably in a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks or so, and we're going to pick his brain about that and much more. But if you're looking at what wide receivers to target based on player prop totals, that is an article to check out at fantasyalarm.com. Don't forget, Fantasy Alarm has your cheat sheet and one-stop shop for dominating your drafts digital. It's constantly being updated with new information. $26.99 is the draft guide by itself, or you can get it free with a monthly or annual subscription to Fantasy Alarm. Start your free 7-day trial of Fantasy Alarm All Pro and get immediate free access to the draft guide. Go to fantasyalarm.com. I got to share this with you, Mark Garcia, who is at High Low FF from the player profiler, the 33rd team, and of course 1 week season. Just got off the phone at the break with my wife. My kid had his final baseball game of the season tonight, and he lost in the 3rd place game. Took 4th place this year, first time ever. They only play 6 innings. He had the semifinal game on Tuesday, 7-3 in the 5th inning. Final score, they lost 20-14. It is crazy town banana pants. Never seen a game like it.
Yeah, that's wild.
3-hour and 7-minute Little League game. Where have you ever heard of that before? I couldn't even stay for the whole thing. I had a show to get to. I couldn't even stay for the whole thing. So I just briefly talked to him. He seems like he's in good spirits, which is good. And now we turn the page on baseball season. He's excited for flag football season. We here at the HSFF show are excited for fantasy football season. We're going to talk about the FFPC best ball tournament mostly tonight. I want to get into some targets and fades with you. Remember, you can use this information that Mark Garcia is about to dispense to you. $125 entry fee, and you can win $200,000 when you register for the best ball tournament at myffpc.com. Ezekiel Elliott is without a team, but he is not without an ADP right now. People are still drafting him. A lot of people I know still think he's going to end up back in Dallas this year, which would obviously hurt Tony Pollard. Running back 56 at the 1503. Mark, how do you handle a guy like Elliott who is without a team right now? And quite frankly, I guess we can get this conversation over to Tony Pollard as well. How does this, I don't want to say like, let's just say the possibility of Elliott returning to Dallas, how should that affect Tony Pollard's 2nd round ADP right now?
I think Tony Pollard, from a median projection standpoint, is probably appropriately priced, even with the assumption that there's going to be another back there sharing work. And that's kind of how I've been approaching that situation. And I've kind of taken it one step further in targeting a guy like Malik Davis or a guy like Deuce Vaughn as the guy that could potentially share or subsidize a little bit of that rushing and receiving workload. Deuce Vaughn is not going to be like ever, even if Tony Pollard, we're going to knock on wood here because no one wants to see a Tony Pollard injury, but even should Tony Pollard see an injury, Deuce Vaughn is not going to be like a 60% snap rate player in the NFL. It's just not going to happen. But a guy like Malik Davis, who they had kept around for a very specific reason, we don't know what that reason is, but they kept him around. He very well could see a 60-65% snap rate, assuming like Zeke doesn't resign and assuming there's an injury to Tony Pollard or he misses a few games or whatever the case may be. So that's within his range of outcomes. So again, I like to kind of think of these things through range of outcomes. I'm just not drafting Zeke. There's just too much from a declining efficiency metric standpoint to where is he going to go, where he carries value still? Is he going to be anything other than a handful of outside the red zone carries plus red zone work? We don't know. So it's just, it doesn't make sense to me to take shots on Zeke from a range of outcomes perspective.
You know, just to give the viewers an idea, running backs that are going after Ezekiel Elliott in the FFPC best ball tournament right now. Chuba Hubbard, an injury away type guy in Carolina behind Miles Sanders. You have Leonard Fournette, who could sign somewhere with a significant role this year. You have Zamir White, who we talked about quite a bit already. Chase Brown, who's behind Joe Mixon. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, again, he's basically free. I mean, you're not taking him in the first round anymore. Like, so there's some value there. And of course, everybody's darling Ty Chandler also going after Ezekiel Elliott in drafts right now. So I think to your point, there is a lot of upside out there. We just touched on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. What about Isaiah Pacheco, a guy that not a lot of people thought he was going to be ready for the season as quick as he was. But now he is practicing, recovering from two injuries this past offseason. He's already practicing, and he's looking at a 706 ADP, running back 27. He's going behind James Conner, David Montgomery, Swift, Damian Pierce, Alexander Madison, Cam Akers. All those guys are currently going ahead of Isaiah Pacheco. And I got to wonder, Mark, when you consider the offense there and to see Pacheco, who wants to work on, or he said he's worked on his pass catching in the offseason, I got to wonder if Pacheco is being a little bit undervalued right now. Is he a target for you in FFPC best ball tournament drafts?
He is not, actually, and I'm going to switch that around completely. The upside case for a guy like Pacheco was always that he sees an increase in other aspects of a game of an NFL running back than simply the short yardage type role. And that's kind of what he has made his way into playing time by, is that short yardage type back. And that then bred over into early down work when CEH was struggling. And now it's like, this was a 6th, 7th round. I forget where he was drafted, but I think it was 6th or 7th round.
I think 7th.
Yeah, 7th round, second year back, and does not have breakaway speed. His breakaway run rate was extremely low last season. So it's like he's there to, or like value-wise, how is his profile any different from like Dante Foreman, like to throw a comp like out of left field there. Whereas guys that go in so much later than we touched on a couple of them, Rashad Penny, Brian Robinson, who is expected to still, I mean, he got shot in the thigh and still saw 18 running back opportunities per game last season. And now the reports out of Washington are that Antonio Gibson is expected to operate in a role similar to what Jerick McKinnon is leaving behind. So that leaves a heavy dose of early down expectation as far as volume goes for a guy like Brian Robinson, going 3 full rounds later than Pacheco. Obviously not the same offense, but it's like, I don't know. They got Eric Bieniemy coming over, so we don't know what that's going to look like. But yeah, so the opportunity cost was much too high for me from a range of outcomes perspective when you are expecting his value to be tied to his role and his efficiency growing when he has not shown that in either college or the NFL game.
I think that's interesting too, because you will not find a lot of takes, Mark, and you probably have noticed this on Twitter, about a lot of people advocating for a guy like Brian Robinson in the offense that he is in over a guy like Isaiah Pacheco and the offense that he's in. But I think you make a valid point. I mean, it's all about draft capital. It's all about value. It's all about ADP, right? And until Robinson catches up with Pacheco, there is a significant value there. Let's move up a little bit further in ADP and talk about a guy that I'm going to be honest with you, that I was kind of out on the majority of this offseason when he shredded his knee early in the season last year. And I mean shredded it. Javonte Williams had massive knee problems. It wasn't just an ACL tear. It was a lot of other stuff. I just kind of wrote him off. I'm like, I'm not looking at this guy at all. Then miraculously, this is a player who somehow is ready to go training camp. Now, he said he doesn't know how much he's going to play in the preseason, but he's practicing in training camp right now. And he's running back 28. Now, he's moved up to the 709. If you watch the Pros versus Joe's coverage with the FFPC earlier this week, you saw Javonte Williams ascend up the ADP board over the course of those 3 drafts. 709 is where he's going right now. And I got to tell you, Mark, if you're going with like a 0 RB approach in your best ball draft, which I know not a lot of people do, but some people do, boy, you're doing it right if you get Javonte Williams at the 709, especially when you're trying to beat out thousands of other people to win a $200,000 grand prize in the FFPC best ball tournament. It may not work out, but to me, the value and the ADP is right at this moment in time for Javonte Williams for me.
Yeah, and he started even cheaper than that too.
Yeah, totally.
So that's an interesting scenario because of what we've talked about up to this point, where it's like we expect Denver to be a better offense. We know that backfield is probably going to be some form of a 1-2 punch between Javonte Williams and Samaje Perine, who they went out and got. And the fact that Samaje Perine had never carried the football more than 97 times since his rookie season. And this is his 6th season, I think, 5th or 6th season. So Samaje Perine is not a guy who we should just expect to like see 15 touches a game. He is probably their change of pace and their primarily pass down type guy. And if that's the case, the best case scenario for either of those guys, Javonte's is tied to health and Samaje Perine is tied to pass catching work in a PPR format. I think there's value to both of them. And I have been going as far as like drafting them on the same team because it's not like it's not like a lead back and backup type backfield. I don't think coming into this season, it's like a 1A, 1B type backfield. And I think that now you're just playing the touchdown variance game where you can capture like hit or miss spike weeks. I mean, look at the Miami backfield last season. It's like when Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert were both healthy, it's like they just alternated running back 1 or running back 2 weeks. If you had both of them, you were capturing an RB2 plus at significantly low draft capital. So that situation is a lot like that example to me this season. And I have no problem because similar to Philadelphia, where it's like best case scenario for those guys is not for one of them to be the alpha. It's for like efficiency and touchdowns. I think there's merit to drafting them both on a best ball roster.
We talked about Gerald Everett earlier in the show, so I want to play a fun little game. This is like we don't really do it on the HSFF hour anymore, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. It's called Would You Rather. I'm going to play a Would You Rather with you with Gerald Everett. You tell me, again, let's for the purposes of this conversation, let's say you can only draft one FFPC best ball league.
Purely academic.
Purely academic, right? There's no theory to this whatsoever. Gerald Everett, would you rather have him and all the guys? I'll start off going, well, I won't tell you where I'm going to start off. Let's do this. Would you rather have Gerald Everett or Chig Okonkwo?
Purely, I mean, we're not assuming like ADP value, all that. I mean, purely
just in a vacuum. I will tell you this: all the guys I'm about to mention to you will roughly be around Everett's ADP, but they're either going to go up or down, and we'll find where you find out we'll find where you sit on Gerald Everett.
It's Everett for me.
Okay.
Yeah, let's leave it at that.
Gerald Everett or Greg Dulcich?
God, this is so hard to like just make a 1 or 0 statement.
I know.
Probably Greg Dulcich.
This is not what you do at all.
Yeah.
Right? And like I can see the gears turning. So you're gonna say Dulcich there.
Yeah.
Okay. Gerald Everett or Dalton Kincaid?
Everett.
Gerald Everett or Tyler Higbee?
Oh God. Higbee.
Okay. Gerald Everett or Dalton Schultz?
Everett.
Well, let's do one more. I think I know where you're going to say on this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Gerald Everett or David Njoku?
Joku.
Gerald Everett or Pat Fryermuth?
Oh, that's probably the closest one.
Really?
That's probably the closest one because Gerald Everett is probably going to have such a higher touchdown expectation, but Fryermuth is probably the he's one of the tight ends that's going later or in the middle point of the draft that I think does have the tight end premium volume boost. So it's probably Fryermuth for that.
All those guys I just mentioned are going ahead of Gerald Everett in the FFPC best ball tournament. Everett has an ADP of the 10-12. Okonkwo and Dulcich and Kincaid and Higbee are all going in the 10th round as well, but they're all ahead of them. And then Schultz and Njoku and Fryermuth, 9th, 8th, and 7th rounds, respectively. Let's go. And I'm probably not going to find anybody here. Gerald Everett or Sam Laporta?
That's an Everett on everything but like a Detroit pass catching stack that I've taken.
Everett and Laporta?
Yeah, so Everett's going to beat Laporta for me on anything other than like a Detroit pass catching stack.
Okay, I now I understand. I'm sorry. Everett or the freshly rich Cole Kmet with his extension with the Bears?
That's probably Kmet.
Okay. Everett or Irv Smith in Cincinnati?
Everett for volume and tight end PPR tight end premium.
That makes sense. Mike Gesicki is a guy that could re-break out now that he's not a prisoner of Mike McDaniel's offense anymore. He's in New England. Everett or Gesicki?
Everett.
I think the rest of these guys. I mean, I'm just going to go rapid fire here. Tell me if you would take any of these guys over Gerald Everett. Juwan Johnson, Tyler Conklin, Trey McBride, Taysom Hill, Darnell Washington.
Not necessarily over him, but I am mixing in a significant amount of Trey McBride.
Because of like the Cardinal situation and then Zach Ertz there right now?
Yeah. I mean, Zach Ertz is entering his age 33 season, multiple ligament damage in his knee. The Cardinals are probably going to be absolute trash. So how much are they going to want to play him when he comes back? I just like the upside versus cost profile.
Remind us out, Mark, final question for you, the most important question. We will continue to follow you on Twitter at HiLowFF. We will check out all your content for 1 week season at 1 week season. We will check out all your content at Player Profiler and of course over at the 33rd Team. When is your podcast on Player Profiler as far as the schedule goes?
It should be on Monday evenings, and the time that it was released is in flux currently.
Okay, so Monday evenings, that's where we're going to check you out. Mark, I know I'm going to check you out at the top of a lot of FFPC leaderboards over the course of the season. Thanks for joining me tonight, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Mark Garcia at HiLowFF on Twitter. Thanks to him for popping aboard. Thanks to our producer, Anthony Rivera, for hanging out with us and running the ship tonight, steering the ship. We're going to be back at 7-6 Central next week for the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Remember, go to myffpc.com. You can win a pair of $1 million grand prizes there, one in the FFPC main event and the other in the FFPC Fantasy Pros Championship. That's just $350 to sign up for. Do it at myffpc.com. Dynasty leagues are going off there. $5, as little as $5 best ball leagues there as well. Dynasty Nerds with Garrett Price is up next. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and make it a great Thursday night.